The city breathed its own kind of music, and he was just a part of it. The deep rumble of a subway train underneath the pavement was the bass line. The chatter of people, the honk of a taxi, the distant wail of a siren, these were the percussion. And right there, on a wide pedestrian walkway between a shuttered newsstand and a busy coffee shop, was the melody. It came from an old, battle-scarred upright piano, painted a fading sky blue. A hand-painted sign in simple white letters leaned against it. Street piano, play me. He did more than play it. He lived inside it. He was a young man, maybe in his mid-20s, with hands that looked more suited to fixing an engine than coaxing Chopin from worn ivory. His clothes were clean but well-used, a practical jacket against the autumn chill. He didn't have a nameplate or a fancy hat for tips. He had a worn canvas backpack and a small, open case at the piano's feet where people sometimes dropped a coin or a crumpled dollar bill, more out of habit than anything else. But when his fingers touched the keys, the walkway transformed. He didn't just play songs. He built worlds. He'd start with something familiar, the opening notes of Claire de Lune, sweet and recognizable. People would smile, nodding as they hurried past. But then, he'd bend it. A slow, bluesy slide would creep into the next phrase. The rhythm would shift, becoming something looser, something that made your shoulders move without you telling them to. He'd weave in a snippet of a pop song from the coffee shop radio, then a run of notes that sounded like rain on a tin roof, before circling back to Debussy. But it was a Debussy that had just taken a walk through the city and had stories to tell. He was entirely self-taught. His first teacher was his grandmother's little electronic keyboard, a Christmas gift when he was a boy. She'd play old hymns on it, her fingers slow and sure. He learned by watching, by listening, by pressing keys until the sound matched the one in his head. There were no sheet music books, no stern teachers correcting his posture. There was just the sound and the feeling it created. As he grew, the internet became his conservatory. He'd watch grainy videos of old jazz pianists with their incredible, flying hands. He'd find tutorials for movie soundtracks and lose himself in their emotional sweep. He'd listen to classical giants, not to copy them, but to understand the emotion they were pushing through the black and white notes. The piano on the walkway had been his home for 3 years. He knew every one of its quirks. The F-sharp in the middle register had a soft, muffled thud. The highest octave chimed like slightly out-of-tune bells. He worked with these things, not against them. He made the muffled note a heartbeat in a slower piece. He used the bright, jangly high notes to sound like sunlight. One Thursday afternoon, the sky was the color of old chalk, and a damp wind snaked down the street. His fingers were flying through his own version of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, mixing it with the driving, almost hip-hop beat he'd made up. A small crowd had gathered, not huge, but a solid dozen people momentarily forgetting their commutes. A delivery guy on a bike had stopped, one foot on the ground, just listening. A mother with a stroller was gently swaying. In the crowd was a young woman, maybe a few years younger than him. She stood very still, a large portfolio bag slung over her shoulder. She wasn't just listening, she was studying asterisk. She watched his hands, saw the way he used his whole arm, the way he leaned into the board for a booming bass note, the way his touch became a feather for the quiet parts. Her expression wasn't one of simple enjoyment, but of deep, professional recognition. She heard the technical flaws, the occasional rushed passage where his untrained fingers stumbled, the unconventional pedaling. But she heard something else, something much louder, a raw, undeniable voice, a musical soul speaking directly through the instrument, without filter. As his piece crashed to its final, joyous chord, the small crowd broke into genuine applause. He gave a shy, almost embarrassed nod, not looking at anyone directly. The woman didn't clap. Instead, she walked forward as the crowd dispersed. She crouched by his open case and placed a $5 bill inside. Then, from the front pocket of her portfolio, she pulled out a flyer, crisp and official looking. She held it out to him. "Here," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "You should do this." He wiped his hands on his jeans and took the paper. At the top, it read, "The Vanderman International Piano Preliminaries, Regional Auditions." Below was information about repertoire requirements, dates, and a prestigious concert hall address he'd only ever walked past. He shook his head, a small smile on his face. "This isn't for me. I just play here." "That's exactly why you should do it," she said, more firmly. She pointed to the bottom of the flyer. "They accept video submissions. You just have to send a recording of a piece from their list. Look, they want the prelude in C-sharp minor." You were just playing parts of it in the middle of your thing. I heard it. He had been. He often wove classical fragments into his city symphonies. Rachmaninoff's dark, stormy prelude was one he loved for its drama. I don't play it properly, he said, the word feeling strange in his mouth. What was properly anyway? Neither did Van Gogh when he started, she said with a shrug. She stood up to leave. They're looking for a sound. I think you have one. It's worth a shot. What's the worst that can happen? She gave him one last look, a mix of challenge and encouragement, and then melted into the foot traffic. He stared at the flyer. The Vanderman. It was a name he knew. It was for kids who started lessons at 5, who went to special schools, who owned tuxedos. He looked at his piano, with its chipped blue paint and its missing caster. He looked at his hands, which were strong but marked with small nicks and calluses from moving the heavy instrument. For a week, the flyer sat on the small table in his tiny apartment. Every time he saw it, he felt a little pinch of something, not quite longing, not quite fear. It was the feeling of seeing a door to a room you'd always assumed was locked. What if it wasn't? The student's words echoed. What's the worst that can happen? One rainy evening, he decided. He set up his old smartphone on a stack of books, pointing it at the keyboard in his apartment, a cheap digital thing he used to practice quietly. He didn't dress up. He just played. He played Rachmaninoff's Prelude not as a museum piece, but as he felt it, as the sound of a coming storm over the city skyline. He played it with the rhythm of an anxious heartbeat, with crashes that felt like thunder, with quiet passages that sounded like the hush before the rain. It was full of flaws. It was also, in its way, completely alive. He attached the video file to the application form online. He typed his name in the box. He stared at the submit button for a full minute, his heart pounding harder than it did during any performance on the street. He clicked it. The screen changed to a simple thank you for your application. He let out a long breath, almost a laugh. There, he'd done it. It was a silly thing, a whim. He'd never hear back. They probably had a computer that automatically rejected videos, where the pianist wasn't wearing a suit, or where the opening chords were played with too much pedal. He closed his laptop and made a cup of tea, putting the whole grand, foolish idea out of his mind. It was just a thing he did, a message in a bottle tossed into a vast, indifferent ocean. He went back to his real world, to the rhythm of the streets and the faithful blue piano, and forgot all about the locked door he'd just given a gentle, tentative push. The email arrived 2 weeks later. It sat in his inbox between a coupon for a pizza place and a reminder to update his phone software. The subject line was simple: Vanderman Preliminaries, Application Update. His finger hovered over it. This was it, he thought. The polite, automated thank you for your interest letter. He almost deleted it without reading, not wanting the small sting of the official rejection. But something made him click. Dear applicant, it began. He braced himself. We are pleased to inform you that the selection committee has reviewed your submission and would like to invite you to perform a live audition. He stopped breathing. He read the sentence again, then a third time. The words didn't change. An invitation, a date, a time, an address for the Vanderman Concert Hall. Instructions to arrive 45 minutes early for registration. It was real. For the next few days, he lived in a daze. The city's noise seemed quieter. His own playing on the blue piano felt different, like he was a spy in his own life. He practiced the Rachmaninoff Prelude on the digital keyboard in his apartment, but now a gnawing little voice in his head started whispering, that note is too loud. That tempo is wrong. You're holding that chord too long. He tried to find a recording of a famous pianist playing it, to learn the right way, but listening to it, so perfect and clean and powerful, made his own version sound like a child's messy drawing in comparison. He shut it off. He had to play it his way. It was the only way he knew. The morning of the audition felt surreal. He put on the best clothes he owned, a pair of dark jeans without any holes and a plain, black button-down shirt. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like himself, just slightly more formal. He didn't look like a Vanderman competitor. The concert hall was in a part of the city he rarely visited, where the buildings were older, grander, and seemed to whisper of money and history. The Vanderman Hall itself was a fortress of culture. Huge marble columns flanked the entrance. His sneakers squeaked on the polished stone floor of the lobby. The air smelled of lemonwood polish and old books. A profound, heavy silence filled the space. A silence that felt expensive and deliberate, so different from the ever-present, accepting noise of the street. He followed signs to a check-in table. where an efficient-looking woman with glasses took his name, checked it off a list, and handed him a numbered sticker. Competitor 28, warm-up room is down the hall, third door on the left. You have 10 minutes at the practice piano before your scheduled time. Wait there until you're called. The warm-up room was already full of sound, for other pianos were being played at once. A chaotic symphony of different pieces clashing in the air. The other competitors were there. A young man in a perfectly tailored suit played a complex, fiery passage from a Prokofiev concerto, his fingers a blur of absolute precision, his back ruler straight. A woman with her hair in a severe bun worked through a delicate Scarlatti sonata, her movements small and exact, like a watchmaker. Everyone looked prepared. They had teachers, parents, or friends with them, whispering last-minute advice, adjusting collars, offering sips of water. They belonged here. He felt like he had wandered into a secret meeting. He found an empty piano in the corner. It was a beautiful, well-kept upright. He sat down, the bench at the right height, the pedals smooth under his feet. He placed his hands on the keys. They were perfect, even, responsive, the tone rich and clear. For a moment, he was intimidated by its perfection. His blue piano friend was full of personality and flaws. This one was a silent, flawless judge. He started to play, softly at first, just a scale to get a feel for it. Then he began his piece. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the Prokofiev and the Scarlatti. He tried to find the storm, the city's skyline, the feeling, but he was too aware of the other brilliant players, aware of the sterile room, aware of the fact that this was just a warm-up, not a performance. His playing felt stiff, his heart pounding in his ears instead of in the music, unseen by him. The door to the warm-up room had opened. The 3 judges for the preliminary round had decided to observe the competitors informally. Before the official auditions began, they stood just inside the doorway, an older man with sharp, intelligent eyes and swept-back silver hair, the head judge, a woman with a kind but weary face, and a younger man with a neatly trimmed beard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They moved through the room, listening for moments to each pianist. They nodded slightly at the young man playing Prokofiev. They gave a small, approving smile to the woman with the Scarlatti. Then they heard something different. They heard the Rachmaninoff, but it was rougher, it had edges. They turned towards the corner. They saw him. They saw his intense focus, his body moving with the music in a way that was almost athletic, not the controlled, economical motion they were used to. They saw his head dip low over the keys, then throw back slightly on a loud chord. The head judge's eyebrows drew together slightly. It was not a look of interest, but of scrutiny. Interesting technique, the younger judge murmured. Not kindly. Very physical. The head judge didn't answer. He listened for another 30 seconds. He heard a passage where the rhythm pushed forward with a driving, almost jazzy pulse that wasn't in the score. He saw the competitor's foot pressing the sustain pedal in a long, muddy sweep that Rachmaninoff wouldn't have recognized. To the judge, a man who had dedicated his life to the precise language of written music, this wasn't interpretation. This was a misreading, a lack of fundamental discipline disguised as passion. He is feeling, the woman judge said softly, trying to be fair. A raw connection, feeling without structure is noise. The head judge replied, his voice low and final. He's treating a masterpiece like a playground. He's not ready for the stage. He'll crack under the pressure. They exchanged a glance, a silent agreement. They had seen this type before, the talented amateur who thought emotion could replace rigor. It always ended the same way, a train wreck of good intentions. They moved on without another word, leaving him still playing in his corner, completely unaware that his fate in their minds had already been decided. Before he'd even set foot on the actual stage, a staff member poked her head into the room. Competitor 28, you're next. Follow me, please. His stomach dropped. This was it. He took a deep, shaky breath, stood up from the perfect piano, and followed her down a hushed, carpeted corridor. She stopped at a heavy, soundproofed door. The stage is through there. You'll see the piano. The judges are seated at a table in the center. You may begin when you are ready. Good luck. She opened the door for him. He walked through, and the door clicked shut behind him, sealing him into the quietest space he had ever experienced. He was standing on the stage of the Vanderman Concert Hall. It was vast, rows upon rows of empty, plush red seats stretched back into a shadowy gloom. The ceiling was high and vaulted. A single, magnificent concert grand piano set under a soft, focused light in the center of the stage. It was a creature of gleaming black polish and golden lettering. It looked both beautiful and terrifying. And there, about 20 feet away, at a long table with a single light, sat the three judges. They had notebooks open, pens in hand. Their faces were polite, professional, and utterly unreadable. The silence in the hall was so complete it seemed to press against his eardrums. There was no city hum here, no distant conversations, just this immense, waiting quiet, and the gaze of three people who held his silly, fragile dream in their hands. He walked to the piano. The sound of his footsteps on the wooden stage was absurdly loud. He sat on the bench. It adjusted smoothly. He looked at the keys, then out at the judges. The head judge gave a small, formal nod. It was not an encouragement. It was a command to begin. His mouth was dry. His palms were damp. This was the moment. The blue piano, the walkway, the grandmother's keyboard, the student's flyer, it had all led here. To this silence, this instrument, these faces. He lifted his hands and placed them on the cool, perfect ivory. The silence in the concert hall wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a presence. It felt thick, like water, and he was sinking into it. The lights above were warm, but they felt like spotlights searching for flaws. The grand piano stretched out before him, a landscape of black and white that suddenly seemed foreign and dangerous. He took a breath. The sound too loud in his own ears. He could feel the eyes of the three judges on his back, patient and heavy. He had to start. He had to find the music in here, in this temple of quiet, that usually came to him surrounded by noise and life. He let his fingers fall. He began the Rachmaninoff, the famous, slow, tolling chords that open the piece. Asterisk bong, bong, bong asterisk. He played them carefully, correctly. The sound that came from the piano was incredible. It was rich and deep, vibrating through the floor and up the legs of the bench. It was 10 times more powerful than his blue piano. It should have been inspiring, but it felt like he was piloting a spaceship he didn't know how to fly. He moved into the faster, swirling notes that came next. His fingers knew the pattern. They had played it 1,000 times in his apartment, on the street. But here, his nervousness made them tight. He rushed a little. The clarity of the piano made every tiny stumble sound huge. In his mind, a critical voice, sounding oddly like the efficient woman at the check-in desk, started narrating. Asterisk too fast, uneven. The pedal is messy. Asterisk. He tried to push the voice away. He tried to remember the feeling, the dark clouds gathering, the first drops of rain. He played the next section, the melody crying out over rumbling bass notes. He put more force into it, leaning his body into the keys the way he always did. The piano roared in response, a magnificent, terrifying sound. He lost himself for just a second in the power of it. And then it happened. From the darkness of the hall, a voice cut through the music. Stop, please stop. His hands froze, hovering over the keys. The last powerful chord hung in the air, then was swallowed by the silence. His heart hammered against his ribs. He slowly turned on the bench to face the judges. The head judge, the older man with silver hair, was leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. His face wasn't angry. It was calm, thoughtful, and somehow that was worse. Thank you, the judge said. His voice was amplified by the hall's acoustics, smooth and educated. That is enough for us to understand your approach. The young pianist just stared, his mind completely blank. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. You played your piece. You finished. You left. The judge continued, his tone taking on a gentle, explanatory quality, the kind used for a child who has broken a precious vase without meaning to. The piece you have chosen, he said, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, is a cornerstone of the repertoire. It is not merely a series of notes and emotions. It is an architectural wonder. It has a structure, a foundation, a specific intention behind every marking on the page. The judge paused, letting the words sink in. The other two judges watched, their expressions neutral. The young woman with the kind face looked slightly pained, as if she wished this weren't happening. You clearly have a strong connection to the instrument, the head judge went on, choosing his words with care. A certain raw energy. That is not nothing. It was faint praise, and it felt like a small, cold stone dropped into the pianist's stomach. However, what you are doing is not interpretation. It is, I'm afraid, a misreading. You are adding pushes and pulls to the tempo where there should be steadiness. You are using the pedal to create a haze, where Rachmaninoff calls for clarity. You are, to put it simply, overreaching. Each word was a precise, gentle tap from a small hammer, and they were breaking something inside the young man. The dream, the foolish hope, was cracking. For your own benefit, the judge said. And now his voice took on a note of what he clearly thought was kindness. A teacher helping a struggling student avoid embarrassment. We would like you to try again. But this time, we want you to play it, simply. Play the notes as they are written. Focus on a moderate, controlled tempo. Moderato, no rushing, no excessive theatrics. Let us hear the piece itself, not your embellishments. Demonstrate control. That is the foundation of all true musical expression. Control, not chaos. He sat back, giving a small, encouraging nod. Take a moment. Compose yourself. Then begin again. From the start, the younger pianist turned back to face the piano. His vision blurred slightly. He stared at the endless black polish, seeing his own vague, distorted reflection. He felt hot with a shame that was so deep it was almost lonely. Overreaching, misreading, for your own benefit. The phrases echoed. He thought of the blue piano. He thought of the people who stopped to listen, not because they were judging architecture, but because the sound made them feel something, a memory, a sadness, a jolt of energy. He thought of the student who gave him the flyer. You have a sound. Was that sound just chaos? Was the only real music locked behind a door of rules he'd never learned? For a long moment, he considered doing what they said. He could try. He could play it straight. It would probably still be bad, because he didn't know how to play that way. But maybe they would see he was trying to learn. Maybe they'd give him a little credit for following instructions. It would be safer. It would be easier. It was what they wanted. He placed his hands on the keys. He could feel the expectation from the table behind him. They were waiting for the corrected version, the proper version. And then, a different kind of heat rose in him, cutting through the shame. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a kind of clear, cold certainty. This was the only chance he would ever get in a place like this. If he played it their way, he would fail as himself. He would be a bad copy of the polished young man playing Prokofiev in the warm-up room. If he played it his way, he would fail as whatever they thought he was, a street player with no discipline. But at least he would fail on his own terms. At least the last sound he made in this beautiful, silent hall would be his own. The fear was still there, a fluttering in his chest, but underneath it was a solid rock of decision. He took a deep, slow breath, filling his lungs. He closed his eyes, shutting out the gleaming piano, the vast hall, the judges. He thought of the rain on the city pavement. He thought of the rumble of the subway, a sound deeper than any bass note. He thought of the way the light changed on the buildings before a storm. He opened his eyes. His posture changed. He wasn't hunched nervously anymore. He sat up, his shoulders squaring. He didn't look back at the judges for permission. He didn't nod. He simply let his hands descend to the keyboard once more. But he did not start playing. He held them there, hovering. The silence stretched. 2 seconds, 3. He was making them wait. He was gathering not just himself, but the entire atmosphere of the room, pulling it into him. He could feel the judge's puzzled anticipation shifting behind him. The head judge might have opened his mouth to speak, but then he began. But it was not the same beginning. It was not the careful, correct chords he had played before. He played the first note alone, a single, deep bass note, letting it ring in the perfect acoustics until it was almost gone. Then the next note, a space of silence between them. Then the third. It was unbearably slow. It was a heartbeat in a deep sleep. It was the slow drip of water in a cave. This was not on the page. This was not *moderato*. This was something else entirely. He held the third chord, not moving to the swirling notes yet. He leaned on the pedal, but it wasn't a haze. It was a gathering cloud. The sound didn't blur. It deepened, expanding to fill every corner of the silent hall. He could feel the judges frozen at their table. This was not what they had asked for. This was not control. This was the calm before the storm, and he was just getting started. The single, deep note hung in the air of the concert hall, a solitary bell tolling in a vast space. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, waiting. He let it sit, stretching it until it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Then, with a touch so soft it was almost a thought, he began the famous, ominous 3-chord pattern. But he played it not as a declaration, but as a whisper, a secret. Each chord was separate, a dark, rounded shape placed carefully in the silence. The space between them was as important as the sound itself. It was the sound of footsteps in an empty street late at night. It was the feeling in your chest when you see distant lightning, but haven't heard the thunder yet. At the judge's table, the shift was immediate and physical. The head judge, who had been leaning back in his chair with an air of patient correction, slowly straightened up. His chin lifted. This was not what he had instructed. This was slower, more deliberate, more controlled, but in a way that felt dangerous, not safe. The younger judge with the beard stopped tapping his pen on his notebook. The woman judge leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the lone figure at the piano. He moved into the swirling, fast notes that came next. But now, they weren't a nervous rush. They were different. They were the first scattered drops of rain, but played with a chilling, crystal clear precision. Each note was distinct, like ice tapping on glass. He was using the incredible clarity of the concert grand not for polite beauty, but for a sharp, almost frightening lucidity. You could hear every single one of the dozens of notes, a cascade of dark water. It was technically demanding, played with a focus he hadn't shown before. But the effect was not one of showy skill. It was of gathering tension. Then came the melody, the crying, singing line over the rumbling left hand. Before, he had attacked it with force. Now, he let it weep. He pulled the tone from the piano, making it sing with a lonely, human voice. It wasn't operatic. It was intimate, a raw confession made in a huge, empty space. His body moved with it, not with big, theatrical sweeps, but with a deep, coiled intensity, as if every ounce of feeling was being channeled directly into his fingertips. He reached the first great climax, the thunderous chords that usually shook the room. He didn't just play them loudly. He built them. He started them a fraction softer than expected, then layered power into them, wave upon wave, until the sound wasn't just heard in the ears, it was felt in the chest. The bass notes of the magnificent piano vibrated up through the floorboards. It wasn't chaos. It was a calculated, perfectly timed storm. And as the last echo of the chord faded, he did something utterly unexpected. He slipped, for just 2 bars, into a rhythm that wasn't in any classical score. It was a faint, soulful groove, a hint of a blues shuffle deep in the left hand. It was so subtle you might miss it if you weren't listening closely. But it transformed the music. It was no longer a Russian tragedy from a century ago. For those 2 bars, it was a universal ache, something you might hear in a late-night club or feel in your own lonely heart. It was the sound of the city he came from, bleeding honestly and unavoidably into the classical framework. The head judge's mouth had gone slightly slack. He wasn't hearing a misreading anymore. He was hearing a translation. The young man was taking the architecture the judge loved and showing him the ghost that lived inside it. He was proving that the emotion wasn't an addition, it was the foundation. And he had just stripped away the polite scaffolding to show them. The piece moved into its more frantic, desperate middle section. Here, the young pianist's hands became a blur, but it was a controlled whirlwind. The precision was blistering, the speed frightening, but every phrase had a shape, a destination. He wasn't running away from the technique. He was using a technique they didn't recognize, one born of thousands of hours alone, of training his hands to speak his own emotional language. The power was immense, but it was never out of control. It was a wild animal that he had somehow, impossibly, tamed and was now directing with a look. He swept into the final, quiet return of the opening theme. Now, those same opening chords, which had been a whispered secret, were transformed. They were heavy with memory, weighted with everything that had just happened, the storm, the blues, the desperation. They were played with a profound, devastating tenderness. The sound was so quiet it seemed to pull the listeners forward in their seats. You could have heard a pin drop in the hall. The judges were absolutely motionless. The woman judge had a hand pressed softly to her chest. He built the final crescendo, not with brute force, but with a heartbreakingly slow gathering of sorrow and resolve. The music swelled, a last, powerful cry against the darkness, and then, it ended, not with a bang, but with the softest, most final whisper. 3 quiet chords, descending into nothingness. He held the last one, letting the sustained pedal keep it breathing its last, faint breath. And then, he lifted his fingers and his foot silenced a different silence than before. This was not the empty, waiting silence of the audition hall. This was a full, deep, and ringing silence. A silence that was part of the music itself. He didn't move. He kept his head bowed, his hands resting gently in his lap, his eyes closed. He was still inside the world he had built. At the judge's table, no one moved. No one reached for a pen to write a comment. The head judge stared at the space where the young man sat. The critic in him, the scholar who knew every marking on every page, was utterly disarmed. That had not been Rachmaninoff as written, but a terrifying, thrilling part of him wondered if it was, somehow, Rachmaninoff as asterisk felt asterisk. As asterisk lived asterisk dot. The younger judge simply shook his head slowly, not in negation, but in pure disbelief. He had come to judge control, and had witnessed a kind of control so complete it had set the music free. The woman had tears in her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. She had heard a lifetime of perfect performances in this hall. She had never heard one so naked, so unguarded, and yet so masterfully delivered. 10 seconds passed. Then 15. The silence continued, thick and respectful. It was the highest compliment they could have paid him. There was no hurried, polite applause to move things along. There were no immediate notes on technique or tempo. There was just the sound of the music, living on in the air and in their minds. Finally, the young man at the piano took a slow, shaky breath. The world came back. The polished wood of the stage, the faint smell of the lights, the weight of the judge's gaze. He had done it. He had played it his way. And now, there was nothing left. He stood up. The movement felt loud in the quiet. He turned to face the judges. He gave a small, stiff bow, not a performer's bow, but more of a simple acknowledgement. A thank you for listening. The head judge met his eyes. The man's expression was unreadable, but the sharp, critical glint was gone. In its place was something complex, a mixture of shock, reevaluation, and a dawning, profound respect. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply looked at the young man, and in that look, he seemed to be seeing him for the very first time. The pianist turned and walked across the wide stage, his footsteps echoing again. He reached the heavy door, pulled it open, and stepped back into the carpeted hallway. The door swung shut behind him, cutting off the silent hall. He stood there in the dim corridor, alone. His legs felt weak. His heart was finally slowing down. From the other side of the door, there was no sound, no applause, no voices calling him back. It was over. He had defied them. He had poured everything he had into that piano, and now all that was left was the echo in his own ears, and the certain feeling that he had just blown his only chance, in the most spectacular way he possibly could have. The hallway outside the stage door was a tunnel of quiet, but it was a different quiet now. It was the quiet of aftermath, of empty energy. He leaned against the cool wall for a moment, just breathing. The adrenaline that had carried him through the performance was draining away, leaving him feeling lightheaded and strangely hollow. He could still feel the vibration of the last chord in his hands. He could still see the darkened hall and the 3 silent figures at the table. That long, stretching silence after he finished it played over and over in his mind. Was it awe, or was it just stunned disapproval? He had no way to know. All he knew was that he had done exactly what they told him not to do, and now it was done. He walked slowly back towards the warm-up room. The sounds of other pianists still filtered out a crystalline run of scales, a powerful Beethoven chord progression. The world of the competition had kept turning. He collected his jacket from a chair, not making eye contact with anyone. The young man in the tailored suit was just being called to the stage, adjusting his cuffs with a look of focused confidence. Their worlds, he realized, would never really intersect again. He pushed open the heavy front doors of the concert hall and stepped back into the city. The noise hit him like a wave, cars, shouts, the rumble of life. It was jarring, but it was also a relief. It was real. He walked without any particular direction, just putting distance between himself and the marble columns and the silent judgment. He ended up, almost without thinking, at his usual spot. The blue piano stood where it always did, a familiar friend in the chaos of the walkway. He ran a hand over its chipped paint. He sat down on the wobbly stool. For a long time, he just sat there, not playing, just listening to the city's symphony. A delivery truck beeped. A couple argued cheerfully about where to eat. A skateboard rattled over the pavement. Finally, he placed his fingers on the familiar, worn keys. He didn't play Rachmaninoff. He played something slow and meandering, a melody of his own that drifted with his thoughts. He wasn't playing for anyone. He was just reminding himself who he was and where he belonged. The piano's slightly tinny top notes and its muffled F-sharp were a comfort. This was his instrument. The perfect, roaring beast in the concert hall was a dream, and like most dreams, it was over now. A few people dropped coins into the case as they passed. A regular, an older man who often listened for a minute on his way home, gave him a nod. The normalcy of it was both soothing and a little sad. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Back in the Vanderman concert hall, the auditions ground on through the afternoon. The judges heard the rest of the competitors. They heard flawless technique, moving expression, and several outstanding, competition-ready performances. But the air in the room had changed. A new standard of comparison, wild and unexpected, had been introduced. During a short break, the three judges sat in their green room, a small, comfortable space with soft chairs and a pot of coffee. The usual post-audition chatter was absent. The silence was heavy. The younger judge was the first to speak, swirling his coffee in its cup. "Number 28, he said, not needing to say more. The woman judge let out a long breath. "I've never heard anything like it." It was like he rebuilt the piece from the inside out. The head judge sat staring at the wall, his sharp eyes distant. He had not written a single word on the young man's evaluation sheet. It was still blank. "It was a profound act of disobedience," he said slowly. His voice wasn't angry. It was contemplative. "We gave him a direct instruction to play with control, to simplify, and he did," the woman said softly. "Just not our kind of control. His control was absolute. It was the control of someone who knows exactly what he wants to say and will use every tool, every rule he knows and some he's invented, to say it." The head judge nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Precisely. We asked for the blueprint. He gave us the living, breathing house, with ghosts in the attic and music playing in a room we didn't know was there." He finally looked at the blank sheet. "How does one score that? On technique?" He broke half the rules. "On musicality?" It was the most compelling musical statement I've heard in this hall in years. He put his pen down. "The purpose of this preliminary round," he said, as if reminding himself, "is not to find the most finished product. It is to find the voice with the most to say, the one with the potential to become something extraordinary." He looked at his colleagues. "Did we hear that today?" The other two judges were silent for a moment. Then, they both nodded. "Then there is only one thing to do," the head judge said. He picked up his pen and, for the first time, wrote on the young man's sheet. He didn't write a score. He wrote a single, decisive word, asterisk asterisk advance asterisk asterisk dot asterisk asterisk asterisk. 2 days later, the young pianist was back at his blue piano. The autumn sun was weak but bright. He was deep inside a flowing, improvised piece when he saw a well-dressed older man standing at the edge of the small crowd. The man wasn't moving on. He was just listening, his head tilted. He looked familiar. It was the head judge. The pianist's fingers faltered for a second, then kept going, his heart starting to race again. What was he doing here? Had he come to deliver the rejection in person? To explain why his misreading had failed? The judge waited until the piece came to a natural end. The small smattering of applause from the bystanders died down. The judge then stepped forward. He didn't look out of place, just observant. "Hello," the judge said. His voice was quieter here, without the hall's acoustics. "Hello," the pianist replied, his voice tight. The judge gestured to the piano. "May I?" The pianist, confused, stood up from the stool. The judge sat down. He didn't adjust the stool. He simply placed his hands on the keys and played a few chords, listening to the sound. He played the opening of a Mozart sonata, clean and perfect. The blue piano responded with its quirky, honest tone. "It has character," the judge said, stopping. He looked up. "It requires a dialogue. You cannot simply impose your will upon it. You must listen and adapt. A valuable skill." He stood up, offering the stool back. The pianist sat, still saying nothing. The judge reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. He held it out. "The formal letter will arrive in the mail, but I felt this warranted a more personal delivery." With trembling fingers, the pianist took the envelope. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the Vanderman crest at the top. The text was brief. It stated that competitor number 28 had been selected to advance to the next round of the Vanderman International Piano Preliminaries. Details would follow. He read it 3 times. The words didn't change. He looked up at the judge, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You told me to play easy," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. The judge's stern face softened, just a little, around the eyes. "I did, and I was wrong. I asked for the notes. You gave us the meaning behind them." He paused, choosing his words with the same care he had in the hall. But this time, they were different words. "What you did in there was not easy. It was the hardest thing a musician can do. You were true to your own voice, in a room designed to make you conform." That he shook his head. "That is not a misreading. That is a rare kind of brilliance. We would be fools not to want to hear what you do next." He gave a small, formal nod. "Practice will begin on the concert grand. You have much to learn about the traditions you chose to reinterpret, and we he added, a hint of something like humility in his voice. "Perhaps have something to learn from you about where music truly lives." With that, the judge turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians. The young man sat on the wobbly stool, the letter in his hand, the sounds of the city swirling around him. He looked at his blue piano, his partner in all of this. The judge was right. It did have character, and so did he. He wasn't just a street pianist anymore, and he wasn't a conservatory clone either. He was something in between, something new. He had silenced the judges not by following their rules, but by showing them a new language. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his pocket, and turned back to the keys. He had a lot to think about, and for the first time, the future didn't feel like a locked door. It felt like the next, uncharted chord in a song he was only just beginning to play. He started to play again, a smile touching his lips. The music that came out was full of the city, full of the storm, and now full of a quiet, dawning hope.